once again, Internet. My name's Nicole, and today I'll be doing the time and place tag. This tag was created by Jen Campbell, and I will link the original down below. I wasn't tagged because I'm really bad at keeping track of tags. Well, I may have been tagged, and I just don't remember. But it sounded cool, so I'm doing it. So the idea of this tag is to name 10 books that you really strongly associate with a particular time and place in your life. Usually these are books that you read at a particular time and place, and because you happen to read it at the right time, it really impacted you. For me, there are a little bit more of books that stand out to me because I have an anecdote that corresponds to a particular time, and for some of them, those anecdotes correspond to when I read them, and some of them not so much. First book on my list was Redwall by Brian Jacques. This is the first book in his Redwall series, and the series is about mice and other woodland creatures as they fight, and they live in an abbey and they go on adventures and all sorts of things. And I just have a very distinct memory of buying this at the Scholastic Book Fair, which if you went to elementary school in the United States in the 1990s was probably a staple of your childhood. And I have a very distinct memory of seeing the Redwall book on the shelf and being like, what's this? And I later became really obsessed with those books. So between like 4th and 6th grade, so 4th grade is when I remember this happening, and between 4th and 6th grade I read like all of those books that existed at the time, and I was really obsessed with them. The second book that I have a really distinct memory of reading is The Lord of the Rings, and the reason why I have a distinct memory of reading this is because it took me an incredibly long time to read, not because it took me a long time to get through, but because it took me a long time to get the actual books to read. So I started out reading this book, and so my older brother had a big bind-up like this. It wasn't this one because the movies weren't out yet, so it was like the old cover that the mass market paperback had for a really long time, the like white and tan kind of one. I'll put a picture of it. And so he had that, and I read the first part. I read The Fellowship of the Ring in that big bind-up, and then he was like, actually I want to read this now, so I'm going to take it back. And then I like waited for like 3 months for him to let me read the rest of the book. I was in 6th grade at the time, by the way. I moved on from the Redwall books to the Lord of the Rings. That's kind of what happened. And so I was just like waiting for him to let me read it, and then at some point I realized he wasn't actually reading it himself, and then I got really mad at him that he wouldn't let me borrow his book again. And so by this time it was almost Christmas, and so in my St. Nicholas stocking my mom gave me the third book in the series. She gave me The Return of the King. So she thought she's giving me the second book, and she was not. She gave me The Return of the King, and I was both really excited and more angry about this, and more disappointed. So then I like tried to harass my brother into letting me just read the second book, which didn't happen. And so my mom ended up buying me the second book, The Two Towers, for Christmas. And so then I finally had all three, I finally had the second two, and I had already read the first one, and so I finished off the series. And so I have a really distinct memory of the first time I read The Lord of the Rings, because I just had an incredibly hard time getting the books because I lived in the middle of nowhere and libraries were difficult. And at the time I was still in middle school, and they did not have The Lord of the Rings in my middle school library. So the next book that I have on my list is Elk Speaks, and I have this one. Okay, I actually have two very distinct memories for this book. So I first read this book in, I believe it was 8th grade, and I can't remember if I got it out of the school library or if I bought it used, but either way I remember having this really ratty used copy, and if I did get it from the library I never gave it back because I kept that book. But so this book is about, or is supposed to be about, the last of the Lakota medicine men, and so that's Nicholas Black Elk, who is the title person / character. So Black Elk was interviewed by the author of this book, who is John D. Neidhart, and he spoke in Lakota and his son translated. And so the way the author presents the book is that this is entirely Black Elk's story as given to him, and that he kind of just like collated it and organized it into an interesting manner. And so the first reason why this book really impacted me in 8th grade was because it was probably the first book that I really read that made me realize that like everything I knew about the Native Americans was like a terrible stereotype, and that there was a lot going on with the Native Americans that I did not understand or have any like exposure to through my school system. So my second experience with the book Elk Speaks is actually with a slightly different book, and that is The Sixth Grandfather, and this is a transcript of the recordings from Elk Speaks, the recordings that the original author used to create his book. And you can see from the recordings that he made some changes to the things he was told. And so it was a really interesting and crystallizing moment for me to realize that not only did I like not know much about Native American culture from where I was coming from, but that most of the information that I had learned or that had been told to me had like so obviously been filtered through the white lens sort of, and it was really obvious with that book because the author who received this information through translation and wrote it down, recorded it in English, didn't follow the story per se. Like he changed things in Black Elk's life story. And so yeah, that was really interesting to me, and both times that I interacted with that story were very formative in the way that I viewed how the United States has treated Native Americans. So the fourth book that I wanted to talk about is Valis by Philip K. Dick. I read this, I believe, my sophomore year of high school, and I remember it. This was my first Philip K. Dick book. It is probably not the best place to start with him. It is a really incredibly strange book. The basic plot is that the main character, who is the author and also Horse Liver Fat, so Horse Liver Fat is the author's name. If you like took the Greek and like rendered it into English, it would be Horse Liver Fat. And so he begins the book being like, I'm going to call myself Horse Liver Fat so that I can tell my story in a third person and get like some distance and like think about it. And you're like, okay. And then things get progressively weirder from there, and they culminate with a pink beam of light that's an alien life form. But anyway, it gets really weird. The reason why this book really stuck in my mind is it's probably one of the best books at describing mental illness, both in terms of like from the author's point of view, because Philip K. Dick had a lot of mental health issues that he struggled with throughout his life, and so it's both from like his point of view and sort of like seeing the point of view of someone who has mental health issues, and then also as someone personally who's like known people who have really severe mental health issues and like watching them, because in the book, you know, at first things seem relatively normal, like they're a little weird, but they're not that weird, and then they just get more and more like bizarre, and it builds so slowly that you don't really notice at first. And my experience in dealing with people like family members who have mental health issues is that that's kind of what happens, is like at first things are a little weird and then they get more weird, and it like you kind of stop noticing how much more weird they've gotten until you're like 5 years down the line, and then you're like, whoa, how did we get here? What happened? Yes, so I'm not 100% certain that is what you're supposed to get out of Alice, but that is definitely what I took away from it. And for that reason, it's something that really sticks out in my mind, although it's not necessarily a book that I recommend to a lot of people because it is very, very strange. Next book that I wanted to talk about is Cat's Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut. I actually read this book towards the end of high school. The thing that I really remember from Cat's Cradle is actually something that happened in college, and this was in my last year of undergraduate, and my physical chemistry professor, actually this was my second to last year of undergraduate, so my physical chemistry professor had us calculate what would happen if you dropped Ice 9 into the ocean and simultaneously transformed all of the water on Earth into Ice 9 all at once. Like, what would the crystal energy, what would the release of energy be from the changing crystal lattice? Which was the coolest extra credit assignment I think I ever had. It was also probably one of the only extra credit assignments I ever had, but it was fun and it was cool and I really liked it. The next book that I want to talk about is one that I actually have not read, and this is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. This is the first book that I ever bought when I got my new Kindle. And I still haven't read it because I bought my new Kindle, and I bought this book because it was something that was really being talked about a lot at the time, especially this was when I was just beginning grad school. So what this book is about is it is about Henrietta Lacks, whose cervical cancer cells became the first immortalized cell line, and they're called HeLa cells, and they're used widely throughout the world. And it's about Henrietta Lacks and her life and like her family and like what happened to them after this happened and all of these things. And I still haven't read it, but everybody was talking about it at the time and I really wanted to read it, and I actually read like a third of it, and then I just got distracted by the fact that I could buy like any book ever on my Kindle and have it right away, and never got back around to it, but I should do that. But yes, I just remember this book because it was the first book I ever bought on my Kindle. So the last two books that I have to talk about are both books that have to do with Ivan. So the first one is The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. So Ivan actually started reading this series pretty much right away when it was first released. And so he had been waiting for like 3 years for the second book in the series. And the second book in the series came out like, I want to say like 6 months after we started dating, maybe less than that, maybe like 3 months. And so, yeah, so there was this one night where he was like, I'm going to go to a book event and get a book that just came out that I've been waiting for. I don't think that we should do anything tonight. And it was like a Friday night or something, and I was like, oh, it's fine, I'll just come over and, you know, read myself. And so I did that, and like we had dinner and we were both reading, and then I finished my book, or I finished my papers or whatever I was working on, and I was like, okay, I'm done. You want to go do something? And he was like, nope, still reading my book. And I was like, okay, well, can I borrow a book to read? And he was like, sure. You want the first book in the series? And I was like, okay. So I started reading it, and then I got a little ways into it, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna go home now and sleep. Can I borrow this book and like bring it back to you in a couple days when I see you next? And he was like, nope, it's signed. So I spent a fair amount of time trying to convince him that he should let me borrow his signed book and that I would not hurt it, and that it was already damaged. I did not do that, and did not succeed. And so at the time there was still quite a bit. I read the like entire Kindle preview, which at the time for some reason was like half of the book. So I got like, maybe it was like a third. So I got like a third of the way through the book that night, and then I was like, okay, I'm gonna come over tomorrow and read more of your book since you won't let me take it home with me, because even though we weren't planning on hanging out today, I'm coming over to read your book. And so yeah, so he wouldn't let me take the book home, so I read it all over at his house. And the last book that I wanted to mention is also a book that has to do with Ivan. This is the first book that was gifted to me on a Kindle, and it was gifted to me by Ivan, and it is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. And I don't know, it was really magical, and I really liked it, and I'm really happy that he gave it to me. Ivan's picks for books gifts are kind of hit or miss, but that one was really good, and I really liked it, so good choice there. So those are all the books I wanted to talk about for the time and place tag. Let me know in the comments below if you have a particular story about a book, the time and place when you read a book, and I will talk to you all later. Bye!